folks, on 7.2 megacycles, and listen to your station. Station Debunk. Knock the fit out of profiteers. Invite your neighbors over to listen in with you. While you're rounding up your neighbors, we'll see if Maestro Mac can coax a little music out of his generally giddy gramophone. We'll start our program immediately after the music.
From the heart of Hitler Germany, your messenger Paul Revere greets you again. Countrymen, friends, foes, Jew haters, and Jew servers.
It is for this reason, of course, that I, Robert H. Best, a native-born and forever loyal son of South Carolina, have thrown my hat into the ring also in the campaign for congressional seats. As I have told you in previous talks, I realize quite well that I cannot return to America until the war is already a thing of the past. Wherefore, I cannot occupy any of the seats to which you elect me in November. By voting for me, however, you will be registering an effective and absolutely legal protest against the greatest betrayal in history, namely, against the betrayal of America to the kite by America's renegade number one, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Most of you will remember, I trust, the story I told you some weeks ago about Deacon Hardshell and his way of voting by writing across every ballot at every election the words, "There ain't nary a one-fifth." You are today in a position to register a scorching protest not only in Deacon Hardshell's negative way, but also in a real positive way. At a certain amount of danger to my own life, I have provided you with a way of voting positively by remaining myself in Europe and launching my protest candidature within the frame of the Triple B radio program to which you are now listening. For me, for myself, and for your children, you can cast a vote in any of several ways which I have explained in previous talks. You can write my name, for instance, or simply 3 B's in large letters across every ballot. Or you can draw a line through every name on every ballot. Or merely one line through the whole ballot. Or you can take the easiest way of all and simply remain deliberately away from the polls entirely. With method number 1, you register a real and a positively manly and womanly vote for me and for yourself and for civilization's crusade, of course. While with method number 2, you invalidate the ballot in a gesture of negative contempt. And with the third method, you save your time for more worthwhile things than voting in a Jew-controlled election. Any of these 3 methods, however, is a vote directly against Roosevelt, and at least indirectly, a vote for my candidature and for your welfare. Take your choice and act according to your own conscience. Here, of course, my friends, is speaking your self-appointed correspondent for the New World Order and your protest candidate in the November election. If you care to do so, by the way, vote for me for every position of every kind in your community. Vote for me for school commissioners. Vote for me for state governor. Vote for me for coroner. Vote for me for every position everywhere, throughout the whole of America, unless some other candidate for the same office in your community declares openly that he will do his utmost to deliver you from Roosevelt and from the kite curse which now controls almost every branch of our national, state, county, and city government. If any man or woman in America runs for any office on a platform of cleaning out the Jews, then vote for him or her by all means. Ignore my candidature for this respective office. Consider me as a candidate only for the offices now held by Jews and Judocrats, but not against any person who promises to purge our country of the kite curse. BBB, Triple B, Best Berlin Broadcast. Carry on.
Here is striking and encouraging evidence of the tremendous British fighting power which guards the integrity of this bastion of empire. strategic points around the city, gun emplacements ring one of the most strongly fortified bases in the world. The garrison, which is being continually reinforced, is fully capable of maintaining Singapore as a city of the British Lion.
Yarns for Yanks. This is Frank Graham. We have another guest yarn spinner on this edition of Yarns for Yanks. He's one of your favorite stars, and he's here to tell you another favorite American story. The yarn is Robert E. Sherwood's Extra Extra, and our storyteller is the great star of stage, screen, and radio, and an all-American guy, Spencer Tracy.
Hi, fellas. Here's a story that's always been one of my favorites. I hope you guys down in the Caribbees and you guys in the South Pacific and up in Iceland and over in North Africa will like it too. Wherever you happen to be, if you're in the mood for a crackerjack yarn, here's Robert E. Sherwood's Extra Extra. From the street below came the most terrifying of sounds, the full-chested roar of two men shouting, "Extra! Extra!" through the rainy night. "Extra! Extra!" Mr. Whidden, reading his evening paper, it was the home edition published at noon containing no news whatsoever, wondered what the trouble was. He could gather nothing from the ominous shouts that assailed his ears. But there was an ominous note in their voices, the warning of dark calamity, the grim suggestion of wars and plagues. Where do they get those men with voices like that? And what do they do between extras, he thought. Mrs. Whidden emerged from the kitchen, whither she had retired to bathe the supper dishes. "There's an extra out, Roy," she announced. "So I hear." She walked over to the window, opened it, and thrust her head out into the rain. In the street, 5 stories below, she could see the 2 news vendors. "Extra! Extra!" Mrs. Whidden turned from the window. Something must have happened. There was an overtone of complaint in her remark that Mr. Whidden recognized only too well. It was a tone that always suggested unwelcome activity on Mr. Whidden's part. He wished that she would come right out and say, "Go down the paper," but she never did. She always prefaced her commands with a series of whiny insinuations. "Well, I wonder what it was," she asked, as though expecting her husband to know. "Oh, it's nothing, I guess. Those extras never amount to anything." Mrs. Whidden turned again to the window. "Well, something awful must have happened," she observed, and the counterpoint of complaint was even more pronounced. Mr. Whidden shifted uneasily in his chair, the one comfortable chair in the flat, the chair which he himself had bought for his own occupancy and about which there had been so much argument. He knew what was coming. He didn't want to move and walk down and up 4 flights of stairs for the sake of some information that would not affect his life in the remotest degree. "Don't you intend to find out?" asked Mrs. Whidden, and it was evident that she had reached the snappy stage. Her husband knew that if he didn't go down and buy that damn paper, he would provide fuel for an irritation that would burn well into the night. Nevertheless, that chair was so comfortable, and the weather was so disagreeable, and the stairs were such a climb. "I guess I won't go down, Amy. Those extras are always fakes anyway, and besides, if it is anything important, we'll find out about it in the morning paper." The roars of the men shouting, "Extra! Extra!" reverberated through the street, beating with determined violence against the sheer walls of the walk-up apartment houses, shuddering through the open windows of the Whiddens' living rooms, jarring the fringed shade of the reading lamp, the souvenirs on the bookshelves, the tasseled portieres that led into the hall. "You're just lazy, Roy Whidden," said Mrs. Whidden. You sit there reading your paper night after night, night after night. She turned as though to an invisible jury to whom she was addressing a fervent plea for recognition of her prolonged martyrdom. Then, with all the dramatic suddenness of an experienced prosecutor, she snapped at the defendant. What do you read, anyway? Answer me that. What do you read? Mr. Whidden knew that the question was purely rhetorical. No answer was expected. You don't read a thing. You just sit there and stare at that fool paper, probably the personal columns. When anything important happens, you don't even care enough to step out into the street and see what it is. How do you know it's important? How do you know it isn't? Mrs. Whidden backfired. How will you ever know anything unless you take the trouble to find out? Mr. Whidden uncrossed his legs and then crossed them again. I suppose you expect me to go down and get that paper, cried Mrs. Whidden, whose voice was now rivaling the news vendors. With all I've got to do, the dishes, the baby's 10 o'clock feeding, and... All right, I'll go. I'll walk down the 4 flights of stairs and get the paper so that your majesty won't have to trouble yourself. There was a fine sarcasm in her tone now. Mr. Whidden knew that it was the end. For 7 years, this exact scene had been repeating itself over and over again. He knew that now, if he gave in, he did so because of cowardice and not because of any chivalrous motives. He threw his paper down, stood up, and walked into the bedroom to get his coat. Little Conrad was asleep in there, lying on his stomach, his face pressed against the bars of the crib. Over the crib hung a colored photograph of the Taj Mahal, a lovely white building that Mr. Whidden has always wanted to see. He also wanted to see a lot of places that he had read about in books. He was thinking about these places and wondering whether little Conrad would ever see them, when his wife's voice rasped at him irritatingly from the next room. Are you going, or will I have to go? Must I drop everything? I'm going, dear. Well, hurry. Those men are a block away by now. Mr. Whidden put on his coat, looked at little Conrad and at the Taj Mahal, and then started down the stairs. There were 4 flights of them, and it was raining hard outside. 12 years later, Mrs. Whidden, now Mrs. Birchall, sat sewing on the front porch of a pleasant house in a respectable suburb. And do you mean to tell me that you never heard from him? Asked Mrs. Lent, who was also sewing. Not a word, replied Mrs. Birchall without rancor. Not a word in 12 years. He used to send money sometimes to the bank, but they'd never tell me where it came from. Ain't you ever sort of afraid he might show up? Asked Mrs. Lent. Not him. And if he did, what of it? Fred could kick him out with one hand tied behind his back. Fred Birchall's something Roy Whidden never was, a real man. She sewed in silence for a while. Of course, I am a little worried about Conrad. He thinks his father's dead. You see, we wanted to spare him from knowing about the divorce and all that. We couldn't have the boy starting out in life with his father's disgrace on his shoulders. Shortly thereafter, Mrs. Lent went on her way, and Mrs. Birchall stepped into the house to see whether the maid was doing anything constructive. She found her son Conrad curled up in a chair reading some book. You sitting in the house reading on a fine day like this. Go on out into the fresh air and shake your limbs. But, Mother, go on out, I tell you. Can't you try to be a real boy for a change? But this book's exciting, the boy said. I'll bet. Anything in print is better than fresh air and outdoor exercise, I suppose. You're just like your... Can't you ever stop reading for one instant? I declare, one of these days you'll turn into a book. Now you set that book down and go out of this house this instant. Conrad went out into the front yard and started with no enthusiasm to bounce an old golf ball up and down upon the concrete walk that led from the front porch to the gate. He was thus engaged when a strange man appeared in the street, stopping before the gate to look for the number, which wasn't there. Hey, Sonny, is this Mrs. Birchall's house? Yes, it is. You want to see her? The stairs man was short, slight, and none too formidable looking. Although he was obviously a representative of the lower classes, possibly a tramp, Conrad was not in the least afraid of him. He had a rather friendly expression, a peaceful expression, as though he bore ill will to no one. What's your name? The man inquired. My name's Conrad Whidden. Conrad wondered why the man stared at him so. I used to know your mother before I went to sea. Oh, you're a sailor. Conrad was obviously impressed. Where have you been? Oh, all over. I just came from Marseille. Gosh, I'd like to go there. I've been reading about it in a book. It's a book called The Arrow of Gold. The man smiled. You were named after the man who wrote that book. I never knew that, the boy said. No, I guess not. Your mother didn't know either. Just then, Mrs. Birchall appeared on the front steps, attracted perhaps by the suspicious cessation of the sharp pops that the golf ball had been making on the concrete walk. When she saw her former husband leaning on the gate, her first thought was this. Well, of all things, and here I was talking about him to Adele Lent not 10 minutes ago. Then she realized with sudden horror that her son was actually in conversation with his father. She wondered whether that fool Roy had said anything. Conrad, you come here this instant. Conrad ambled up the concrete walk. How many times do I have to tell you not to talk to every strange man that comes around? He's a sailor, Mother. Oh, a sailor, is he? Somehow or other that annoyed Mrs. Birchall. Will you just chase yourself around to the back and don't let me catch you talking to any tramps or sailors either? Conrad cast one glance toward the man who had come from Marseille and then disappeared from view behind the house. Mrs. Birchall walked elegantly down to the front gate and confronted Roy Whidden. So you're a sailor, are you? She surveyed him with deliberate satisfaction. You look to me like a common tramp. I always knew you'd never get anywhere. I guess you were right, Am. He smiled as he said this. Mrs. Birchall was irritated by the easy good humor of his tone, by the calm confidence in his eyes. Why did you do it? I don't know. It was a rainy night, and I heard a foghorn out in the river. So you left me for a foghorn? Yes, I knew you'd be all right. Your people had money, and I sent some. A lot you sent. Well, I guess it wasn't much, but it was all I could scrape together. Well, what are you bumming around here for now? What do you want? Money? Well, you won't get it. Not a nickel. I told Fred Birchall if you ever showed up, he was to kick you right out. And he'd do it, too. I advise you to make yourself scarce before he gets home. Don't worry, I'm going. My ship sails at 6. Oh, your ship sails, does it? I'll bet it's a fine ship. She laughed harshly at the mental picture of any ship on which Roy Whidden could obtain employment. How did you ever find out where I live? Oh, I kept track of you through the bank. I knew when you got the divorce and got married again. Well, then, why didn't you leave me alone? Why did you come snooping around here for? Just curiosity. I wanted to see what the boy looks like. Well, you've seen him. Yes, I've seen him. That's all I wanted. He straightened up and started to move away. Well, goodbye, Em. Goodbye. And I hope you enjoy yourself on that ship of yours. He was walking away down the street when suddenly she called to him. Roy! He stopped abruptly in response to that well-remembered and once familiar summons. There was something I meant to ask you, she said with a hesitancy unusual for the Emmy he knew. What was that extra about? He rubbed his none-too-smooth chin and thought for an instant. Let's see, it was something about... No, that was later. I guess I've forgotten. Was it about the World Series, she asked, as though trying desperately hard to prompt him. The morning papers were full of it. Was it about that? He smiled with relief. Of course, that was it. The Red Sox won.
Thank you, Spence. Fellas, that was the yarn Extra Extra by Robert E. Sherwood, spun for you by the famous star of stage, screen, and radio, Spencer Tracy. Listen for more in this series of Yarns for Yanks. Your favorite stories as told by your favorite stars. And I'll be around to spin a yarn or two myself. This is Frank Graham speaking. So long. Yarns for Yanks was produced for you fighting men of the United Nations by the Special Service Division of the War Department of the United States of America.
At ease and listen to the Armed Forces Radio Orchestra with your request soloist, Martha Mears. Here's a quarter hour of the music you'll always remember, America's folk songs of tomorrow. The music will be continuous with no interruptions for announcements of any kind. Instead, we'll give you the titles at the end of the program. So, at ease and listen.
That I love you, but I'm saying it calling on 42.34 meters.
ये कांग्रेस रेडियो है, ये कांग्रेस रेडियो है।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, रघुपति राघव राजा राम, रघुपति राघव राजा राम, रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम, पतित पावन सीताराम, रघुपति राघव राजा राम, रघुपति राघव राजा राम. This is the Congress radio calling. Another sensational revelation. You have already listened to the secret telegram of Linlithgow to Amory. Here is a secret circular of the district magistrate of 24 Parganas about the duties of government servants in the event of enemy invasion. The Congress radio calling. We should like to make a few introductory remarks on this secret circular. Indians resident in cities would do well to ponder their fate in the event of an invasion. They will not be able to leave the cities. All the railways and the exit roads will be blocked. The military will have their sole use. As the district magistrate of 24 Parganas makes it very clear, the main roads leading out of Calcutta will be declared closed to civilian traffic. The same fate would befall other cities.
Although some people say he's just a crazy guy, to me he means a million other things. For he's the one who taught this happy heart of mine to fly. He wears a pair of silver wings. And though it's pretty tough, the job he does above, I wouldn't have him change it for a king's. An ordinary fellow in the uniform I love, he wears a pair of silver wings. I'm so full of pride when we go walking, every time he's home on leave. He with those wings on his tunic, me with my heart on my sleeve. But when I'm left alone and we are far apart, I sometimes wonder what tomorrow brings. For I adore that crazy guy who taught my happy heart to wear a pair of silver wings. I'm so full of pride when we go walking, every time he's home on leave. He with those wings on his tunic, me with my heart on my sleeve. But when I'm left alone and we are far apart, I sometimes wonder what tomorrow brings. For I adore that crazy guy who taught my happy heart to wear a pair of silver
ring all set to sail, to make all the monkeys wail, over the ocean ahoy. The sooner we start to do, the sooner the job is through, over the ocean ahoy. There'll be a little smoky-o in Tokyo, hooray, hooray, hooray. And you can bet it will not be from Tokyo, hooray, hooray, hooray. Then Sukiyaki boy will throw away his toy, and Uncle Sam will frown. When Yankee Doodle go to town, there'll be a little Smokey-O in Tokyo. Hooray, hooray, hooray.
Of California, KFWB takes you now to the offices of District Attorney Buron Fitts in the Hall of Justice in downtown Los Angeles, where Robert Arden, your foreign correspondent, will deliver an address to the peace officers assembled there. This is the first time that a representative group of law enforcing agencies is meeting for the purpose of joining forces and establishing close cooperation in the planned fight against the subversive activities of the Fifth Column. Mr. Robert Arden.
Good evening, everybody. This morning, the whole world received the shocking news that Le Roi Soldat, the soldier king of Belgium, had ordered his army to surrender unconditionally to the Nazi invaders. It is impossible at present to judge the exact motives which prompted the leader of the Belgian people to take this unexpected, fateful step, and the world shall have to reserve final judgment for the future. All know that the heroic Belgian soldiers for 18 long days and nights, without respite, fought against overwhelming odds. We know that their task was made incredibly difficult by the hundreds of thousands of refugees who jammed an already overpopulated territory that grew hourly smaller under the terrific pressure of the Nazi surge. But we also know from a Paris dispatch that the Belgian cabinet, acting under Premier Hubert Thielot, dethroned the king and is going to continue to fight at the side of the Allies in the prosecution of their war against Nazi Germany. From this, we can guess at the reason, the ultimate motive force which compelled ex-King Leopold to expose his allies to almost inevitable destruction at this crucial moment, just when it began to look as if the French counterattack in the Peronne sector had a chance to succeed. It was not just bad taste. It was more than that. And observers tonight were busy attempting to answer the one question. What would have been preferable to the Belgians? Fight to the bitter end or acceptance of Nazi domination with ensuing conversion into Nazi service? In other words, should men be satisfied to live as slaves under an unwanted and alien oppressor, or should they die in the defense of their God-given rights as human beings? As far as your correspondent is concerned, the answer to that question was given some 164 years ago by a handful of men who founded and defended with their lives these United States of America. Thus, the gigantic shadow which threateningly hangs over all Europe has moved on to the English Channel just a little bit closer to our own shores. No longer can the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean be considered a safe barrier. It can, and has been, spanned in a few hours. No longer does political or economic isolation constitute a safe defense against foreign influences. Ideas cross oceans and mountains, and they cannot be stopped at political boundaries, even though they may be protected by armed soldiers. Their arrival is only noticed long after they have gained a foothold within the country. On April 15, a new word appeared for the first time in a news dispatch from London, which I quote. Convinced that a Nazi fifth column of spies, provocateurs, and traitors was responsible for the lightning German invasion of Norway, Scotland Yard tonight began a roundup of suspects in Great Britain, unquote. Ever since, that word, fifth column, has haunted our headlines, newscasts, fireside chats, personal discussions, and collective thinking until it has become a veritable shadow over our lives, a shadow that instills doubt and fear into our hearts. Doubt and fear. Those are the two advanced sentinels which lay the smoke screen behind which the fifth column marches on. What is this so-called fifth column? How does it operate? What does it accomplish, and how can it be stopped? Those are the questions which are being asked every moment, everywhere. Well, here is an answer to those questions, an answer based upon facts gathered by your correspondent here, there, and everywhere. There are, roughly speaking, two groups which form the fifth column, the official and the unofficial representatives. The official representatives are in foreign consulates or embassies accredited with the United States government, trade associations, foreign chambers of commerce, and certain exchange institutes. All these are very often the outlets for poisonous propaganda sponsored by foreign governments for their own political purposes, which are quite openly directed against our existing form of democratic administration and intend to bring about a change in our social and economic setup by destroying our collective ideology of Americanism. It would be futile to attempt an enumeration of all the pamphlets, reviews, periodicals, and other printed matter that floods our nation. Radio stations, newspapers, schools, business organizations, even our private homes, all are on the lists of these ever-alert propagandists who, protected by diplomatic immunity, can freely disgorge their undiluted poisonous propaganda which their respective governments intend Mr. and Mrs. America to swallow. This kind of propaganda, however, can be easily detected. It is like a uniformed soldier who goes to war. He can be distinguished and recognized by his colors, and thus perhaps even respected, because one knows what to expect of him, and if it's a fight he wants, one can be ready to meet him. This is not so easy with the second group, the unofficial representatives, whose insidious and nefarious work is usually done under the hypocritical guise of friendship and apparently harmless acceptance of hospitality. This group is formed by so-called fraternal organizations, clubs, patriotic societies, in short, everything from cells to buns. That group is the most dangerous part of the fifth column. It sneaks into the country under false pretenses. It bores from within. It spreads fear and doubt by creating and continually fomenting dissension and discord among brethren. This group is the hardest to fight because it is hard to identify. It has very often been the case that people found some of their best friends to be some of the best agitators for any given foreign cause. Their first activity will always be to get a wedge into the national unity by destroying patriotism. Willingness to fight for the continued independence of a country is slowly being undermined by agitation for peaceful isolation, which always entails total unpreparedness, the cause of total helplessness at the very hour when a sudden attack is made. Class distinctions are being advocated. One class of people mobilized against another. Tolerance attacked. Religion ridiculed. And when economic conditions cause temporary hardships, hatred is easily fanned into all-devouring flames. The agitators know that very well. A people in doubt is a people in fear. And a people in fear can be easily conquered. To facilitate identification of members of this group, it is best to divide it into four main divisions. First, there are the spies. Under almost any excuse and in almost any conceivable appearance, is it possible to find men and women at work trying to get first-hand information on everything pertaining to our national defense. That information may be the blueprint of a new plane or a new speed car, a battleship or a tank, a new gun, or it may be, as we have just recently seen, a scientific discovery. It may only be a photograph of an airfield or a fortified position along a vital defense line, the picture of a harbor, or showing the position of anchored battleships. But once in the hands of the spies, this information becomes a marketable asset that is either sold to the highest bidder or given to the very government in whose pay the spying agent may be. The second group are the saboteurs, usually well-trained men whose duty it is to get into vital factories, industrial plants, railroad centers, in short, to penetrate into those places where one blow with a hammer or one turn of a switch will suffice to wreck the most vital points of our defense mechanism. America builds the fastest planes. The easiest place to destroy them, of course, is the assembly line. American tanks can be stopped best right in the factory. America's workers possess the greatest skill and the highest efficiency. The only way to overcome that is by disrupting their ranks and by inducing them to strike. The saboteur is trained for just that. His hammer is raised, his fingers can find the switch in the dark, and his tongue is well oiled. All he waits for is the word go. The third group are the traitors, Men whose lust for power makes them easy prey for foreign agents who are able and only all too willing to pay a price, be that in cash or in promises of important positions in the future. That is the group from which emerged the Conrads, the Cy-Cinquards, the Henlines and Quislings, men who did not hesitate to betray their own country for a promise that in some instances wasn't even kept. It is hard, very hard, to conceive of any man, particularly an American, to betray his fellow workers or fellow citizens to a foreign enemy. It is equally hard to conceive of an American who would deliberately sell out the traditions of Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln to a Hitler or Stalin. But attempts may be made. These three divisions are the officers of the 5th column. The rank and file belongs into the 4th. This division contains very dangerous elements, since they are, as a rule, very hard to detect. They come as innocent-looking tourists, the same tourists which on March 13, 1938, occupied all available space in the Imperial Hotel in Vienna and took command of the Nazi troops the very moment Hitler crossed the boundary. The same tourists which in 1940...
Tune in, folks, on 7.2 megacycles and listen to your station. Station Debunk. Knock the fit out of profiteers. Invite your neighbors over to listen in with you. While you're rounding up your neighbors, we'll see if Maestro Mac can coax a little music out of his generally giddy gramophone. We'll start our program immediately after the music.
From the heart of Hitler, Germany, your messenger, Paul Revere, greets you again. Countrymen, friends, foes, Jew haters, and Jew servers.
It is for this reason, of course, that I, Robert H. Best, a native-born and forever loyal son of South Carolina, have thrown my hat into the ring also in the campaign for congressional seats. As I have told you in previous talks, I realize quite well that I cannot return to America until the war is already a thing of the past. Wherefore, I cannot occupy any of the seats to which you elect me in November. By voting for me, however, you will be registering an effective and absolutely legal protest against the greatest betrayal in history, namely, against the betrayal of America to the kite by America's renegade number 1, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Most of you will remember, I trust, the story I told you some weeks ago about Deacon Hardshell and his way of voting by writing across every ballot at every election the words, "There ain't nary a one-fifth." You are today in a position to register a scorching protest not only in Deacon Hardshell's negative way, but also in a real positive way. At a certain amount of danger to my own life, I have provided you with a way of voting positively by remaining myself in Europe and launching my protest candidature within the frame of the Triple B radio program to which you are now listening. For me, for myself, and for your children, you can cast a vote in any of several ways which I have explained in previous talks. You can write my name, for instance, or simply 3 B's in large letters across every ballot. Or you can draw a line through every name on every ballot. Or merely one line through the whole ballot. Or you can take the easiest way of all and simply remain deliberately away from the polls entirely. With method number 1, you register a real and a positively manly and womanly vote for me and for yourself and for civilization's crusade, of course. While with method number 2, you invalidate the ballot in a gesture of negative contempt. And with the third method, you save your time for more worthwhile things than voting in a Jew-controlled election. Any of these 3 methods, however, is a vote directly against Roosevelt, and at least indirectly, a vote for my candidature and for your welfare. Take your choice and act according to your own conscience. Here, of course, my friends, is speaking your self-appointed correspondent for the New World Order, and your protest candidate in the November election. If you care to do so, by the way, vote for me for every position of every kind in your community. Vote for me for school commissioners. Vote for me for state governor. Vote for me for coroner. Vote for me for every position everywhere, throughout the whole of America, unless some other candidate for the same office in your community declares openly that he will do his utmost to deliver you from Roosevelt and from the kite curse which now controls almost every branch of our national, state, county, and city government. If any man or woman in America runs for any office on a platform of cleaning out the Jews, then vote for him or her by all means. Ignore my candidature for this respective office. Consider me as a candidate only for the offices now held by Jews and Judocrats, but not against any person who promises to purge our country of the kite curse. BBB, Triple B, Best Berlin Broadcast. Carry on.
Coupon number 17, ration coupon 17. Are you planning to use your shoe ration coupon to buy white shoes? If so, give them the best of care. Keep them clean with Energine Shoe White. No shoe white can make your shoes look whiter than Energine Shoe White. It's made with the very whitest pigment known, and it spreads so easily, dries so evenly, it gives your shoes the neat, well-kept look they must have to give you the most satisfactory wear. For the best of care for the white shoes you wear, remember Energine Shoe White. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
70% of the national income had been spent on the war. This year, the cost of the war had meant 126 quid per head of the population. Now that gives us something to think about. We all know that this war has cost thousands of millions of pounds. And the great mystery is, where did all the money suddenly come from? In peacetime, there was never any money for vitally needed projects for the good of the nation. But when there is a war, as if by magic, the money suddenly becomes available. Why is that? Because the big bosses control the money. They control the banks which control the full flow of money. It's mostly debt. That's to say, it only exists on paper. But they can juggle about with it as they please. In peacetime, they don't think it's worth their while to release more money. Profits can often be made better when money is tight. Scarcity means high prices. Poverty of the millions means millions for the profiteers. That's why they've always arranged things so cutely, so that the poor stay poor and the rich get even richer. But when this war came along, first it was a big opportunity for making even greater profits. And secondly, it was in fact a war for the extension and strengthening of the capitalist system. Okay, for such a good cause, the money was certainly forthcoming. Last year, according to Halifax, they took 70% of the people's money away to pay for the war. That was excellent business. This year, every man jack was fined 126 quid. That's what it amounts to. Taxes have never been so high before. Money was mobilized to win a total victory for capitalism. And now, we've nearly won that victory. But before we win it, mates, let's think over for a minute what we workers could have done with that money had we had it in peacetime. The money was there. It was always there. It was ours. We made it. But we couldn't get hold of it. If we could have turned this country of ours into a place where poverty and need was impossible. But when we've won, we'll go back to a land of poverty and need. Halifax said so. And we've been warned often by others that this will be the case. There will be poverty for the people because capitalism will be on top. That is the victory that we're winning, workers. But we can change it. We can change it into a socialist victory by asserting our rights now, by putting a people's government into power. Then the money will be there, earned by the people, to be spent by the people, and for the good of the people. Workers, take action now to win a socialist victory and to crush the capitalist plans for reaction. Action for socialism, and then the victory shall be for progress. Workers' Challenge will again be calling all workers of Britain and Northern Ireland on a wavelength of 213 meters tomorrow evening at 8:10.
the microphone comes Edward Bowlby to speak to you on the Jewish problem.
As in the case of Britain, but previous to this war even more so, the United States is completely under the Hebrew thumb. The so-called wise men of Washington, or brain trust of the president, are all Jews. It is of additional interest to note that the financial conference at Bretton Woods, the food conference at Hot Springs, and the assistance and reconstruction conference in London were all overpoweringly represented by Jews.
Have you ever given any thought to the fate of your children? I mean, those who are old enough to have some idea of what is happening, but not old enough for military service. You realize that the government's evacuation plan, or should one say their complete collapse, may have a profound effect upon your boys and girls in years to come. Do you remember how in the months before last September our people were lashed into a frenzy of neurosis by the ARP, so that when we declared war, even the Prime Minister thought it advisable to hide in a cellar for half an hour? In fact, when the Germans did not arrive to bomb London out of existence, there was a feeling of something very like disappointment amongst those who had organized the scare. However, the plans for evacuating mothers and children were put into operation even before the war started. Major generals were given the task of escorting the children to unknown destinations. The disorganization and the chaos which set in would be very difficult to describe. But it is doubtful if in the whole history of muddle there has ever been such a classical example of confusion. Either through bad organization, through negligence, or through malice, the position of the children became such that they began returning independently to the cities from which they had come. For months, the whole system of education has been put out of action, and it is estimated that at present there are more than 400,000 school children without any instruction whatsoever. You are listening to the new British broadcasting station, operating on 5,925 kilocycles and on a wavelength of 50.63 meters. You will hear us again at 10:30 p.m. tomorrow. It is doubtful whether a major war leaves the social conditions of a country entirely unchanged, and it very often happens that war reveals many of the uglier features of a nation's social character. So it is with this war. It is very probable that our politicians expected the excitement of hostilities to obscure the grievances of ordinary people, to whom the mere sustenance of life itself was a problem. With certain exceptions, the press has lent itself to this intention, and certainly the BBC has been used most assiduously for the purpose. Nevertheless, the whole stirring of the government's propaganda machine is unable to suppress the complaints and grievances which are increasing each day in number. The reason is that the masses of the people have never had any real heart in the war since it began. If they could have been marched into it with bands playing, drums beating, and balloons going up, if they could have been presented with some genuine and striking victory every day, they might have felt otherwise, but nothing of the sort has happened, and the extremely shifty attitude of the Admiralty in imparting information has tended to discredit all news emanating from government sources. In consequence, the German radio has gained a success and a popularity far beyond the real merits of its transmissions. It is extremely provoking for any decent Englishman to think that our own social injustices have to be brought to light by hostile wireless stations. And it is partly for this reason that we have founded the new British broadcasting station. In future, it will not be possible for the enemy to say that nobody of the people in Britain has the courage or the energy to fight against the evils which the British people have to suffer. It is with the greatest pleasure that we give publicity to a very fine effort made by the Bishop of Chichester and Miss Margaret Bondfield in opening an exhibition dealing with slum conditions. The exhibition is entitled The Homes They Come From. and its exhibits reveal the shocking state of poverty which exists in those miserable warrens where the poor live, and whose landlords probably describe them as houses or dwellings.
And before we conclude this program, here are some messages from British prisoners of war to their next of kin. The first one is from Private Thomas Smart, 293-2886. It's addressed to Mrs. T. Smart, 182 Overton Road, Kirkcaldy, Fyleshire, Scotland. Dear Cathy, I was captured by the Germans and am now in Germany and am well, so do not worry. I will write and give my address as soon as possible. All my love, Thomas Smart. And this one comes from driver Jack Dawson, number 893390, RA. To Ma'am, Mrs. J. C. Dawson, on 60 Sinclair Road, South Chingford, London E4. Dear Ma'am, I am somewhere in Germany. I hope to write a letter soon. Best of health to all at home. I am fine. Lots of love, Jack Dawson. And here's a message from Lieutenant W. Jack, 243122, Starlux 7A. To Mrs. W. Jack, Elgol, Clachnahary Road, Inverness, Scotland. In perfect health and well looked after. Please send toilet requisites when you receive my number. Please do not worry. Love to all, Willie. Here's one from Captain Hicks, Royal Artillery, number 98980. And his message goes to Mrs. T.J. Hicks, Leafield, Church Road, Ashford, Kent. Please don't worry, I'm quite safe and well. Present address, number, rank, name, Starlux 7A, Germany. Will write soon as possible. Fondest love, Walter. And here's a message from Captain M.P. Scott, number EC4060, Starlux 7A, Germany. And he addresses his message to Mrs. M.P. Stott, 31 Uxbridge Road, Slough, Buckinghamshire. Please don't worry, darling. I am quite safe and well. Address is number, rank, name, Starlux 7A, Germany. All my love, dearest, Mark. And here's a message from Lieutenant P. Mulvey, 273845, also Starlux 7A, and it's addressed to Mrs. P. Mulvey, 74 Manchester Road, Accrington, Lancashire. Hello, darling. At last a few words to let you know that I am fit and well, and in very good spirits.